Maybe getting started. Welcome again to the Sutron Global Educational Webinar, Those Damn Librarians. And I'm sure you're all familiar with that saying. We'll be getting started momentarily. Today we have with us Michael Hughes, who's coming to us from our London, UK office, myself, Tanya Anderson, who's coming from Vancouver, British Columbia, and of course our special guest speaker who's coming to us from California. A little about us, I'll turn it over to Michael.
Thank you, Tanya. I appreciate that. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Pleasure to join you. Just a very brief introduction really as to who we are, Sutron Global. Essentially, Sutron Global is a cloud-based library, knowledge and information management solution provider dedicated to information professionals and assisting them in their day-to-day, as we have been for the last 25, 30 years. On the next slide, you'll see examples of some of the solutions by which we deliver that assistance to our client base, special libraries in the main. Core to our offering is our ILS and our discovery platform, but we also have capability for managing archives and also digital assets. So on the next slide, what you'll see is a little bit more information as to the program that we are running now, part of the first wave of which actually is this webinar series where we're giving back by bringing in independent industry experts to add value and give something back to the community. But we're also offering financial assistance to people that are interested in onboarding with our platforms, both our ILS and our discovery platform. And there's been a recent wave of publication, press release rather, about that, particularly via Marshall Breeding. So encourage everybody to reach out to us and find out more about that if that's something that would be of interest to you, and you can find out how you would do it on the next slide if you don't already know. But I'll just leave that there for 1 second, but I'll hand it right back over at this point. It's my pleasure to hand back to Tanya, who will introduce our guest speaker for us today. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. So as I'm sure you're all familiar, we have our guest speaker, Deb Hunt, with us. Deb is a former SLA president from 2013, and she currently works at the Mechanics Institute in San Francisco. So Deb, I'm going to hand it over to you, and please take it away.
Okay, thank you for having me, and thank you everybody for being here today. I'm going to talk about damn librarians, and I remember when I mentioned this to my family, they said, wow, we didn't know that you swore. I said, no, it's digital asset management librarians, and I wanted to explain to them what I was talking about. So today we're going to talk about just ways, a project that I worked on, and how we as information professionals and librarians can think about our skill sets and how they apply to digital asset management. So Tanya, I don't know if it's you that's making the slides go forward, but if you could go to the next one, that would be great. Okay, so this is one of my favorite quotes, and I love Seth Early. He said, modern civilization will not collapse from a lack of resources or a war. It will collapse from the crush of information. I am only half joking. And I think this is really indicative of the crush of information that we all know that we are under every day. Even in the COVID-19 pandemic, we are can be easily overwhelmed by the amount of information that's coming in. But this crush of information is why we are needed, why our skills are needed, because the world really is drowning in information. And as digital asset managers, we librarians and information professionals can turn the crush of information into actionable knowledge that makes our organization or our clients more profitable and nimble. And I'll say it here, I have a favorite saying that information is cheap and knowledge is priceless. And I think that is a very important value proposition that we as librarians and information professionals bring to any organization, whether we work there or we consult with them. So next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about a case study. This is a project I worked on some years ago at the Exploratorium, and those of you in the US may know about the Exploratorium is a museum of science, art, and human perception, which is an unusual nexus of those things coming together. But we had artists there, we had scientists there, human perception, and you'll see as I go through some of the things, and you can see here science. We had a group of scientists from the museum who went to Antarctica. And these images that you are going to see throughout this slide presentation are from the digital library at the Exploratorium, and that's the project I'm going to talk about. So enjoy these beautiful images. So the Exploratorium is this great hands-on science center with over 500 interactive exhibits. It's at Piers 15 and 17 and down along the piers and the waterfront in San Francisco. And it's an educational center. Teachers come from all over the world there to learn, and members of the staff there also go out to other places. And one thing I didn't include here is that it also was a nexus for maker spaces. It was one of the original maker spaces in the world. And when I worked there, I met people from all over the world who came there to either to learn or to lecture or to teach. I had lunch with Bill Nye, the science guy. I shared offices with Nobel laureates who were visiting, and it was an amazing place to be, and it still is an amazing place. So in this project, we had 14,000 indexed assets, which isn't really that large of a collection. I've worked with up to 400,000 assets, not indexed. They were getting indexed, but it was a big project. And many of you probably are in organizations that would have at least this many and many more. And of course, the formats were all over the place: images, JPEGs, GIFs, PDFs, Word files, other formats, audio and video files. And because the museum had been around for a long time, a lot of those audio and video files were on cassette tapes, reel-to-reel tapes, high-8 tapes, and they needed to be digitized. So that's something that you might run into too, is with physical files, what format are they in and how do you get them digitized? And so I want to talk a little bit about why librarians were chosen to lead this project. So there is a library at the museum, but the librarians there, and I was one of them, did not staff the library. We were involved in many projects, from fostering international online educator communities, partnering with other museums, and many other things. And our job title was Senior Information Specialist. And the museum recognized the valuable skills and connections that we brought to projects. And so again, we were always on the forefront. If there was a project, we'd say, we can do that. We'd raise our hands and say, we'll take that on. And the staff and administration at the museum and our museum partners then knew that we were willing to work hard and try things out that maybe we didn't quite know how to do, but we knew we could learn how to do them. And so I encourage you to remember to do that, that if you don't have a skill yet, there's ways to learn how to do that skill, and it will make you more valuable to your organization or to your clients. So next slide, please. So we had a lot of audiences, as you can see here. And so we two senior information specialists had worked with and recognized the needs of these audiences who would utilize the assets and the context for that usage. That was important because they knew how they needed to do their work and what they needed to do their work. We had many years of combined work at the museum, and we knew how users looked for information and often didn't find us or find it, the information. And so you can see we had a lot of different audiences, both within and outside the museum. And we often got requests for images that people had seen on our website or in our print publications, and they wanted to know how they could use those images. And so that brought up this whole need to begin to organize our assets, our digital assets, and not digital at the beginning when we started, so that users could find them and potential users. And also it could be an income stream, because we sold, and they still sell at the museum, a lot of these images for publication and commercial use. Okay, on to the next one, please. So this is a beautiful photograph. Before the Exploratorium moved to Piers 15 and 17, it was at the Palace of Fine Arts, which is out by the marina, by the Golden Gate Bridge. And it is the last standing building, and this rotunda is outside on a beautiful lagoon. It's the last building standing from the 1915 Pan-Pacific International Exposition. It was a great World's Fair. And this building is still there. Luckily, they didn't tear it down. And even though the museum is not there anymore, we have some great photos from there. So I just wanted to mention that. So here were some of the departments that we served. And like any dam project, we needed to manage it and prioritize what would be digitized and indexed first. And you can see these are the departments that we were working with. One of the largest collections was the slide library, and this was in the photography department. At that time, they had over 40,000 slides, and the slides were stored in plastic 35mm slide sleeves. So if you can imagine an 8.5 by 11 or probably 9 by 12 sheet, plastic sheet with little compartments where you could slide the slides would be slid into those compartments, and then those sleeves were inside 3-ring binders, and they were organized mostly by year or maybe exhibit, and these binders were stored in an unlocked giant closet where anyone in the that wasn't locked, and when anyone in the museum wanted a slide, all they had to do was go in, spend a lot of time looking for a slide, and then they would take the slide away. Sometimes they were going to make a copy of it. Sometimes they would use it on the website. And of course, there were 2 problems with this. There were no finding aids other than the year that the photograph or slide was taken. And so they had to do a lot of searching around, or they could ask one of the photographers if they remembered when they took the picture and where it might be. And often the slides that were taken never made it back to their binders, and they were usually the originals. And in the teacher professional development programs, there were some very prolific and are prolific staff photographers who capture images. Everything from Burning Man science, always every year a contingent of exploratorium folks go to Burning Man and do a lot of science stuff, to why there are oil stains on the freeway in a particular spot. So next time you're driving around, notice where there are oil stains. And the reason there are oil stains there is because when cars go over them at high speed and they hit a bump and they go down into the little dip, their car throws oil on the road. I learned all kinds of factoids while I worked with scientists at the museum. And of course, we had thousands of images, plans, and that sort of thing, because we built exhibits and actually sold them. And those plans were both print and digital, because some were very old and they hadn't been created in digital, they were born on paper. And the print ones were in filing cabinets in the front office, or they were scattered around the museum, in the workshop, and other places. But anyone could go into those file cabinets and take a plan just to look at it for a few minutes, but often, just like the slides, those plans never came back to where they were supposed to be filed, and they were lost. Next slide, please. So as in any organization, there were digital shared folders and files on hard drives with no file name standards, no taxonomy, nor anything much in the way of organization for retrieval and duplicate detection. There were all types of formats, resolutions, assets we owned and did not own and did not have the intellectual property to publish, and much more. And there was a lot in print scattered all over the museum. People's desks, file cabinets, as I mentioned, departmental file cabinets, they were just everywhere. So we decided to organize on 2 levels, and these are the 2 that I've described here. The central catalog, which would be the one that would be available to the public, as well as staff, that would be best quality, high and medium resolution for images, full indexing, and then available to all staff and partly to external audiences. And again, we did not make everything available, but the things that we thought would be most of interest to external audiences. We also decided to do departmental catalogs, because sometimes we deemed, as the senior information specialists and the leads on this project, that some things were not going to be of interest outside a department. And so we created these departmental catalogs from the central catalog that often had different qualities and resolution of images and documents, partial indexing, and limited availability within that department. And really, it was to help those departments control access to their material. Some things just weren't ready to be publicly shared, even among the museum, if you think of that as a larger or a smaller public within the museum versus external people coming in. And here's another beautiful image that Paul has now passed away, sadly, but he was a senior information scientist at the Exploratorium, and he was the one who taught me about the oil stains on the freeway. He used to drive, he'd be a passenger in a car, and he would take lots of pictures of freeways and pavements. I learned a lot of science and crazy stuff, but the museum was a lot of fun, and it still is. Okay, on to the next slide, please. So some of the things were how we were going to think about how we were going to organize this information. We had all of these assets and what we were going to do with them. And so think about the skill set that you have, that we as librarians and information professionals have. We have expertise in building metadata schema, taxonomies, and more. We may not think of them in those terms as metadata or taxonomies, but we've used them in our careers. If you use Library of Congress subject headings or medical subject headings, MESH, or other, Eric has a whole taxonomy. There are so many out there. Those are taxonomies. If you've used MARC records or Dublin Core, those are metadata schema. So we created this framework to begin to describe the assets that we had and that we were indexing. And we as librarians and information professionals know how users and potential users look for information and the value that finding information brings to an organization. And really, we turn information into actionable knowledge. So remember what I said earlier, that information is cheap, but knowledge is priceless. And that was our goal, was to make all these assets findable and available for both staff internally and externally as well. And so here's the framework that we began with as we built out the project. And it was really important to think about the audience. And so that's something that I found on several projects I've worked on with clients, is they don't think about the audience. But I always tell them, you know, an architect is going to be looking for something much in a different way than perhaps a scientist would. We had conceptual areas, exhibit names, phenomena, date, place, and event. When I first came to the museum, I said, like, what do we mean by phenomena? Because we had a whole part of our website that dealt with phenomena. And Tanya, if you'll go to the next slide, I'll show, there's a picture of phenomena. This is soap film, and this is bubbles. And if you look at these, you'll see that there's reflection, there's surface tension, there's a lot of things. There's also pentagon shapes. So phenomena would be surface tension on bubbles, which I never knew about till I went and worked at the museum. Learned a lot. So it's just an interesting way to look at the world. So here's a sample on the right of a metadata schema, which is based on Dublin Core. That was what we used for this project. And as librarians, we understand just what it takes to best describe an asset to make it findable. And we had been at the museum long enough, working on many projects with many departments, that we were able to collaborate with them to tickle out just what would work best. But I've also learned working with clients who I haven't worked with for a long time prior to going to working with them on a project, that interviewing people and doing informational interviews and a knowledge audit begins to help inform what a field structure could look like, what metadata would look like, what a taxonomy would look like. And here, for example, you know, asset creator could be like the equivalent of an author or a photographer or an illustrator. Other contributors could be other people that, like co-authors. In our case, we had exhibit builders, the person portrayed, the master format, and these other things. And notice that I have copyright down there, because even today I come across copyright is something that we as librarians understand very well. And if we go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about that. So we're versed in this, and it seems like no matter who I work with, very smart people do not understand that even though an image is available online doesn't mean that we can reuse it as we like, or that we can edit it as we like. And librarians and information professionals do know about copyright and intellectual property. And so that's also another value that we bring to the table. Okay, next slide, please. This is another fun image from one of our exhibits at the museum. Another thing librarians understand is that this kind of project takes time to get off on the right foot. Developing the metadata schema, creating and testing the taxonomy, finding the right software solution, setting up workflows, all of that takes a long time. And librarians have extensive experience and expertise organizing assets of all kinds. And we know that you get out of a record what you put into it. So if you don't index it right or tag it right, it's not going to be findable. And we spent a lot of time up front on infrastructure, but it ended up being well worth it. So it did take a long time to get started. And that's the thing that's often difficult for end users to understand or clients to understand, is that you're not magically going to have a solution in 6 months. It's going to take a lot of background and foundational work to do it right so that you don't have to go back later and redo. So there's the, thinking about selling it to your sponsors, the processing and indexing time, and really the infrastructure that we spend time on, but it is time well spent. So I encourage you not to rush. Next slide, please. So we're pros at these challenges here. We know how to organize information and assets for findability. We are viewed as neutral, working for the good of the entire organization, so we tend not to be territorial. And with the big picture view, we're able to prioritize what needs to be indexed first and why. And that could be because one of its importance, or two, because maybe it's something that is deteriorating, like an old cassette tape or something, or video. And we're able to create intellectual property policies that include copyright and inform those who use the resources about that copyright and intellectual property. And most importantly, we got buy-in from a high-level sponsor. I cannot stress that enough. You need to tell the value proposition, you need to shout it from the rooftops, you need to sell it, and you need to have your 30-second pitch, your 90-second pitch, your 5-minute pitch, because you're going to be selling what you're doing all the time, the value to get this off the ground. And at the museum, we had the assistant executive director. He was the one who was our high-level sponsor, and he helped ensure that folks would engage with us. Most of them were willing, but a lot of them would say, oh, I don't have time for this, or this is too much work, or I don't have time to work with you guys. And that had to come from the top down, that this is what you need to do. You need to work with these senior information specialists to get this project off the ground. Next slide, please. So solutions. Librarians provide solutions, again, in a way that overarches territoriality. We know to start small and let the success of a DAM project speak for itself. Both of us librarians on this project were experienced trainers, and we knew everybody in the museum, and users felt comfortable asking us for help. So that was really important because they trusted us. We were also very good as librarians at documenting processes and policies, which comes in handies when questions arise, and questions will arise. You want to document things, especially because both of us left eventually, and we had others who could take over for us. And remember at the beginning, I told you about those 40,000 slides in the photography department. Well, the photography staff really didn't want those slides to go out for scanning at that point because we had so many slides. It wasn't something we were going to do in-house. And they were afraid the slides would get lost or damaged. But they trusted us as senior information specialists that had worked with them for years, and they let us take a sampling of the slides. And once they saw that they could lock that closet, protect the originals, and easily find the digital slides in many resolutions, they became our marketing team. All the other departments in the museum lined up because they wanted to be next to have their assets indexed and scanned or whatever needed to be done to get them into our database. And it was great because they really were the sales team for us, which was wonderful. Okay, next slide, please. So one of the things that happens is things get lost or they're not able to be recovered. And often we as librarians are perceived as the keepers of old data or old information, and that is a stereotype. But in the case of digital assets and other types of assets that are out there, print as well, it's important to not let things go before they are indexed and saved digitally. So several years ago, when the museum rented extra office space in another building across the street, the graphics department needed to move over to the new offices. And so they had these beautiful posters that were used for exhibits and programming and stuff, and they threw them out. And we didn't have a way to get the original digital because the software was so old that had created them. And what was sad was nobody thought to save them. And the technology really wasn't available to digitize them at the time for large format. And so that's something too, that sometimes it's hard. What's lost is lost, but we want to prevent future loss. And I wish I could give you the URL for this amazing collection, but sadly, the Exploratorium recently decided not to renew the contract with the library software company. So one staffer and one retired librarian are now moving that whole database to a FileMaker database, and eventually it will go back online. So the online link is gone because the software is gone. Otherwise, I would share the link with you. And that's sad too, because the sponsor has moved on. And so that was budget cuts in these times of crazy times that we live in. Next slide, please. So I just want to finish up with us and the expertise that we can bring to projects. We know our audiences, who they are, what they look for, and how. We have expertise in building metadata schema and taxonomies. And if we don't feel we have that expertise, we can learn how to do that. We recognize the business value that finding information and turning it into knowledge brings to an organization. And we know how to create intellectual property policies that address copyright issues and to make sure they're followed. And we have extensive experience and expertise organizing assets of all types. And we know that you get out of a record what you put into it. And just as an aside, I often don't tell my clients that I have a master's in library science, even though those letters are on my business card and on my website and in my LinkedIn profile, because it often limits their perception of what they think a librarian can do because of the old stereotypes. And I'm usually well into a project before I remind them if they knew about it and forget. And they're often shocked to learn that. So we as librarians and information professionals are really working hard to reshape the librarian stereotype with the amazing expertise and value we bring to DAM and other projects. So remember, you need to shout that from the rooftop, your value. And just to wrap up here, I've got another slide about what we bring to the table, the great skills that we have, the big picture view. I think that is so important in all the projects I've worked on. As you know, every organization is siloed, and we work across those silos, which is really important. And that is a huge value that we bring. So think about all the things that you bring to the table. And again, I always say, if you feel that you are too busy to do this kind of work in your current job and there's a need for it, let go of the stuff nobody else cares about. This is the stuff organizations really do care about. And I think important to remember that we make sure that one's DAM house is in order. So last slide. If you want to learn more about ways that you can get your skill set increased in DAM, there's this great site called DAM Guru. It's free, and they've got all kinds of events, learning, even job listings, and much more. It's all for free. LinkedIn has a lot of people working in digital asset management. Go there and find out who's doing stuff and what they're doing. Read what they're writing. And then Sutron Global has a great link, which you'll get the slide deck after, and there's a link to their DAM case studies where you can learn about how others have organized and made findable their organization's digital assets. So that's it for me. We're going to open it up. I went a little longer than planned. I'm sorry. I love to tell stories, and this is a great story. And I just want you to think about how you can expand your skill set and be more valuable either in your current organization or in future jobs in your career. So we'll have time for Q&A now.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Deb. Very interesting. Struck me as a good base of material really for people that are looking to do more in their current role, but also those that might be looking at making a move into a different type of role. And that's one of the first questions that came through actually. But before I read that out, let me just remind people that there is a questions box to the right side of your screen. So if you do want to ask Deb a question, please type that in now, and Deb will be happy to address that. But the first one that came through, Deb, someone has said that their career has thus far been in traditional librarian roles. What tips might you offer them to help them transition into a DAM position?
So I think in your own organization, depending on what assets there might be, I don't know if you're in more of a public or corporate or what, but I think if there are already assets that might be digitized and would benefit from being digitized to make them more widely available, say if you have more than one location, that sort of thing, that's a good place to start to begin to identify those. I talked about on my final slide about some resources, and another one, I didn't put my the book I co-authored with David Grossman in there because it's from 2013, but recently we've been reviewing the information, and it's called the Librarians Skill Book, 52 Essential Skills for Information Professionals. And we've been reviewing it, and really the information in there is timeless, because we talk about how you can create your personal roadmap to get the skills, whether you want to go to DAM or knowledge management or other parallel careers that are out there. And there are tons of jobs in these parallel careers, because IT people are being asked to do this kind of work and they don't know how to do it. They know how to do the systems and the software, but they have no idea how to build taxonomies or create metadata schema. There's some other great books. Heather Hedden has written The Accidental Taxonomist, which I have a copy. I'm looking at my office bookshelf. There's a lot of good resources out there, and as librarians, we know how to find resources. So I encourage you to look around. SLA has a taxonomy division, a KM division. DAM people are scattered throughout those. SLA is a great association for this. If you're more into consulting work or want to go in that way too, SLA and the Association of Independent Information Professionals, or AIIP, .org or SLA.org, have great resources and communities around those. Those are great places to start. And look at the case studies that Sutron Global has as well. Give you some ideas.
Thank you. There's a couple that I really want to ask, so we'll try and get these in for you.
Okay.
Someone's asking how long the project that you described took and how many staff were working on it.
Oh gosh, let me think about this. We had, well, of course we had two. I was 80%, Rose, who was the other senior information specialist, she was full-time. And we had part of an IT person to kind of help us with the technical stuff. We had another person who her job has been, she's still doing it, to do all the permissions pieces, like all the intellectual property, like field all the requests for images, like how do I get a 600 DPI resolution, because on the website we have them free to educators, but they would be low resolution that they could use in their courses and classes for non-profit use. But for those who wanted to use them commercially, we would sell the high resolution ones. And so she did that about half time. We think about that. So that's 1.8. That was probably about 2.5 FTE or 3.5. And then we had a lot of interns. We tapped into library schools in the area, and they got credit for doing internships with us and help us with a lot of the digitizing that we did in-house, though a lot of it we sent out as well. Like I mentioned for the slides, we did that also with high 8 tapes, reel-to-reel tapes that we had no equipment to play or listen to them on. And so that was a labor of love for those who did it in-house, because a lot of it could be, they did a lot of scanning manually, which was a lot of work, print to digital, of stuff that we owned.
Thank you. Is there any initial certification that one should seek that might be beneficial?
I don't think there is. I have never been certified, and I go back to that, I can do this because we as information professionals and librarians know how to do research. We can find out what's out there. We can learn from this. And a lot of, just like Sutron Global, a lot of organizations and companies in the DAM realm, they provide free resources and ways to learn. But again, it's on us to think about those transferable skills. That's what the librarian skill book is all about, to think about, well, I know how to do this. How do I make that? How do I move into this other field, whether it's knowledge management, digital asset management, document management? We have those skill sets. They're transferable to these other areas. And it's just something that we need to do the research and look for. But again, SLAs, the Connect communities, there's a lot of stuff on there that you can learn from. There's some great books out there. Guy St. Clair's books on knowledge management, knowledge services are fabulous. There's just some really good resources, and we know how to do research as librarians. So I encourage you to look to see, but the librarian skill book's in a lot of libraries. It's available on Amazon as a Kindle and also as a print book. It's very inexpensive. It's a great resource to start with, and we'll point you to other resources there too. Too many to mention here.
Thank you. And lastly then, and how long did the project take as a whole, would you say?
Oh yeah, I forgot to say that, sorry. So I have to think, let's
That's right.
see. Well, first of all, okay, so we wrote to get it off the ground, we funded it out of the museum, but we also got an IMLS grant. And so from when we first hatched this idea and then applied for the grant, which probably took about 3 or 4 months to find out if we would get it, and it's never over, right? Because new assets are being created all the time. So they have to be indexed and added to the system. But I would say it was probably about a 3 to 4 year project. And of course, we did other things during that time as well. The dam wasn't a full-time, but it was almost full-time for both of us, for Rose and I.
Perfect. There's one great one just come through. I just want to squeeze it in. How do you respond if other people are making the decisions about what the taxonomy should be and look like?
So generally what I will do, that's a great question, because that did come up, because we had scientists and educators who said, we know this stuff better than you guys. We do this every day. And so what we would do is we would do kind of a blind test, or we would give them a set of maybe 10 assets, and we'd say, how would you describe these? And then we'd say, here's how we would describe these, or here's how we would fit these into the taxonomy. And generally, sometimes we took their ideas because they were good ideas, because they knew their science, or they knew what they were doing as educators. And so it was collaborative a lot of the time. We never assumed that we were the experts. We tapped into their expertise. And again, that's getting the buy-in. It's the collaboration and the cooperation, because we were the experts in organizing assets, but they were the experts in the subject matter. And so we often would question why they were doing that. And often we did take their suggestions, because again, they were the experts, but we also wanted to make it end user friendly, because those who would come in as teachers or journalists wouldn't necessarily know to look it up under that. And so often we would have a short abstract that would be searchable as well. And then they could search for keywords in there too.
Thank you very much, Deb. I really appreciate that. Very interesting session. Let me hand it back to Tanya just to close the session. Over to you, Tanya. Thank you.
And I just want to say thank you to Sutron for doing this, and to everybody for attending. I love what I do, and I think we have a lot of opportunities to stretch and grow outside our comfort zone. And I didn't bring my favorite slide that Chad Hymas has, that shows where our comfort zone is a little tiny circle on the bottom left, and where the magic happens is a giant circle on the upper right. And we want to get outside our comfort zone so we can be where the magic happens.
Thanks, Deb. I did actually really like that slide.
I should have included it.
All right, well, everyone, thank you very much, as we said, for attending. We hope this session helped out. And when you get the slide deck, you'll be able to see also Deb's contact information. So if you have any questions, please feel free, of course, to reach out to her. You can follow us on all of our social media for updates on new and upcoming webinars. We do have one coming up at the end of June, so keep watch for that, and we'll be posting that soon. So again, thank you for attending. You can visit our website for our knowledge services blogs, news, etc. And of course, if you have questions, you can also reach out to us. And again, if there's anything with the COVID, if you'd like to learn more about the program, please feel free to reach out. All right, thank you again, everyone, and we'll hopefully see you at our next session. Goodbye for now.